Nicola Willis, and we had a long interview with her. And during the course of that interview, we discovered, or it was, for most of us, that she's actually running for the seat of Ohio, which has got a really interesting political history, actually. It was Peter Dunn's seat for a long, long time. And during the course of that conversation, obviously, we said, well, who's running against you? And obviously we talked that the sitting MP was the Labour MP, Greg O'Connor. And when I was Mayor of Wanganui, I had a bit to do with Greg because he was then President, or was he Chief Executive? I guess we'll find out in a second, actually, of the New Zealand Police Association. I said, we must catch up with Greg because there's one man that I would have thought Labour would call on to be the Minister of Police. His knowledge is extensive. He's got a great understanding of what it's like to be on the beat and of what the frontline personnel are up to. And it's the one man that they keep on passing by. Nevertheless, Ohio is going to be a bit of a weather vane seat, I think you'd have to say, in this election. And although the election is always fought on the party vote, and we all know that that's what, at the end of the day, NMP will determine the structure of Parliament. Yes, who gets in, though, is very much dependent on a whole series of constituency contests they have around the country. And one of those, obviously, will be Hario. And joining us to talk to us this morning about that and other things is Greg O'Connor, the Labour MP for Hario. Good morning to you, Greg.
Yeah, good morning, Michael. And yeah, it's been a while. We've sort of crossed paths a few times during our respective careers, and funny where we all end up, isn't it?
It is odd. Now, Greg, I'm going to express...
natural line through life is how we end up in these places, isn't it? Don't try too hard, just follow a natural pathway, a bit like a river.
Yes, that's right. And get out of the way if you are on the other side of that river too. Greg,
you're not a glacier. You can do it like a glacier when you push everything out of the way. You end up in the wrong place. If you do it like a river I grew up on the West Coast, and I used to walk and hunt up all those rivers. I just reckon that's the way to live life. Just the river will find its way to the sea. Just a few earthquakes, a few lakes, but it'll get there eventually. And that's where we end up, isn't it?
It is. Now, Greg, you previously were... Now, what was the role at the Police Association? What was the official title?
Well, I was a police officer. I was still a detective, but elected by the police officers to be their president. So I was the president of the Police Association. Right.
Yep. And you were in that role for how long?
21 years as the president of the Police Association, 41 years as a police officer.
Okay. So you took over from Bob Moody, did you?
No, Moody was a secretary.
Right.
He had been a police officer, but he had left and done his law degrees and came back. I took over from a guy called Steve Hines, who had been he was a detective senior sergeant.
That's right, and he was a very good rugby player from Wellington too, wasn't he?
He was. He's now the citing commissioner. I think he said just last time I talked to him, he's just getting ready to head off over to Paris for the
World Cup
happening over there this year, isn't there?
Oh gosh, it's amazing where all the ex-policemen end up at the end of the day. Greg, can I just express?
It's a pretty good grounding, actually. It's because you get used to dealing with people. And this is what I find here. I'm currently the deputy speaker, and I think it's the one place you sort of get to use all the stuff you've learned on the way here, if you like. So probably a bit like you sitting behind the microphone there. A lot of the stuff that you opine on, it's stuff you probably have been learning since you were about 14 or even earlier.
I was just making that point this morning that. You don't go into radio or, talk about radio or politics without a desire to learn. It's almost like it's an insatiable desire to learn, isn't it? When you get to Parliament, you love learning the new stuff every day.
It's actually true. And it's, there's this sort of, I think there's a bit of a myth that, you've got to live life before you come to Parliament. Yes, you do. But on the other hand, you need people. It's a bit like being a doctor. You need people that have sort of been working their way around the human body a long time before they get to the stage where they're removing your heart, don't you? And it's a little bit the same in politics. Some of the people that have actually get a bit of criticism, but when you get here, you suddenly realise that inherent knowledge, the body, the muscle memory of just understanding how the whole law-making process works is pretty important as well.
Now, you've been the member of Ohio for what? Is it 2 terms or 3?
2. Just came in 2017.
All right.
And this will be looking for my 3rd term.
Right. Before we go to the looking for your third term. Can I just express a personal disappointment? Almost everybody has been the Minister of Police in your caucus and cabinet, except you. What have you done wrong?
Well, as you know, you don't become the Minister of Police. You become a cabinet minister. And then the cabinet selected 20 members, and then you have a few ministers outside. Then when a vacancy comes up, you pop them in there, and that's and that's why people move around the portfolio. So nobody gets promoted from anywhere to be the minister of anything. It's a bit like what we're talking about, you being on the radio, me being in Parliament. It's a natural progression. So the decisions are made a lot earlier than that.
So that's right, because the Labour Party selects their cabinet different than the National Party, isn't it? It's always the Prime Minister's call in the National Party, so he can pluck somebody like Stephen Joyce, for example, out of nowhere, and they can become a cabinet minister. You get elected by your caucus, don't you, to go into cabinet, and then the Prime Minister allocates the portfolios. Is that the way it goes?
That's the way it works, yes. So it's the decisions that are made around those are made a long time before they come to fruition. And look, the thing is, look, again, what I said, you work hard and don't try hard. And when people have an absolute steadfast ambition to be somewhere, often they'll wake up one day and find out they're not in the right place. Whereas they may have missed a lot of opportunities along the way. And I tend to, the older I get, the more I believe that, is that just do your bit, see how things work out, and you never know. And just because you can't see a way forward, or you can't see necessarily what your future is, doesn't mean it's not there. But you won't see it unless you're looking.
Yes, you're a bit like my nana. She always used to say, as one door closes, another door opens.
Well, that's actually, and it's true. And I suppose you can't see that at 30 or 40. It's sort of, I think the old brain changes and your ability to do that. And that's why I'm enjoying it here, particularly the old Deputy Speaker's role, because you can see things from sitting in that chair at the front that you just can't see when you're sitting on the side of the house. You probably take more of a non-partisan role to a certain extent, intuitively. And that's why you talked at the start, and I absolutely agree with you about learning. You should peak on your deathbed, and that means it's a terrible day when you go to bed not knowing something you didn't know when you woke up. And that's certainly the opportunity here in Parliament. I've got too many of my mates sort of retired, and they're sort of, I think, a lot earlier than they should have. Good men and women who have still had a heck of a lot to offer, but they're really they're enjoying life. But sort of they're not. I think they could be a lot better for themselves and probably live a lot longer if they were still contributing.
No, it's a fair point you say. It's ironic, isn't it? Here we have, we're talking about Donald Trump, but never putting aside the personalities, you're going to have an 80-year-old versus a 77-year-old for the US presidential election next year.
Yeah, it does become probably that threshold. May have moved up with modern medicine. We'd like to, both of us, what are you? You're probably about mid-60s, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you'd like to think that both of us would be able to have a conversation like this in 15, 20 years' time, wouldn't you? And that the other thing, Michael, is that we will have both learned a heck of a lot more. And this conversation will be filled with facts that we didn't have right today, because we'll be looking at things differently. And that's what I enjoy about being the MP for Ahari, mate, because I know that's what we're going to talk about, is that it's the place where, I used to be the president of the police association. People say, we don't see you anymore. Well, the people of Ahari do, because I'm doing the same job for the people of Ahari that I previously did for the police. And you will be the same. You've been an MP and you've been a councillor. You will have had the same determination to do the right thing by your constituents as an MP, as a councillor, and probably even now sitting behind the microphone. You want to do the right thing by your listeners. And that's what I'm enjoying about being up in Ahari.
I think that's true to one point, though. I think as you do get older, you don't have as much energy as you do when you were 30 or 40. Have you found...
Yeah, but that's true. It's the old rugby analogy, though, isn't it? It's the old fat man's track to the ruck. Remember when you were young, when I was a young guy, you wanted to join every ruck and race around the field? Suddenly, I still turn out on the old parliamentary rugby side, and boy, I tell you what, I pick my rucks.
No, it's the old... all right, now... Nicola Willis would strike me as being one of the younger thrusters, so she'd be a bit younger than you, I guess. And She is obviously going for Oharu as well. I don't know if she lives there. I assume that she does with her family.
No, she doesn't.
Oh, she doesn't. What's the argument that you've got as to why you should be the constituency MP for Oharu and the deputy leader of the National Party shouldn't?
Oh, because I'll be concentrating on Oharu. I don't know if you know, I'm not standing on the list.
I do, yeah.
For the second time, I've been able to get myself off the list. I've always said I suppose that skill set we talked about lends it best to me as a local MP. I sort of like it. It's a bit like being the local cop, really. I love knowing what's going on there. I've just been up in the Johnsonville Mall this morning. You know, people come up and have a chat with you. They won't ever come to the office and tell you, you've got to be out there, you've got to be on the sports fields, you've got to be in the pubs. You know, and a lot of MPs won't or can't go to the pub by themselves, you know, because they're a bit worried about these days with it getting a bit of strife. But,
really?
You know, I'm able to do that. And this is what, and Peter Dunn, I'm probably a little like Peter Dunn was omnipresent as well. Well, of course, if you're a cabinet minister, especially if you're a finance minister, like this is what Grant Robertson's, the last 3 finance ministers have all given up their electorates. Michael Cullen, Bill English, and of course now Grant, because you can't really do justice to your electorate while you're in a high-profile cabinet job. And a lot of cabinet ministers lose their seats simply because, I know my cousin Damien, you know, he's the MP for West Coast Tasman, a massive electorate. And of course he's one of the better performing, probably best performing cabinet ministers, arguably, but that's my family bias coming through perhaps.
Oh, you might be right.
But what a heck of an electorate to service, you know, from Haast right up through to Motueka and Richmond, you know, and so he just simply can't do the right thing by New Zealand often. He does his best. He's got his motorbike. He's up and down the coast there, but it's tough. Whereas, of course, being what I'm doing, I can be pretty much everywhere in my electorate.
Yes, it's one of the interesting features of MMP is that a constituency MP, if they do their job, irrespective of whether the tide's going out or not, will retain their seat. The last election rather proved the lie to that, and that a lot of good members of Parliament on the national side lost their seats irrespective of how they could, because the tide was so strong. Do you perceive a similar tide this time?
Oh, look, the old saying, a week's a long time in politics. And, you know, whatever happens, if what was going to happen today, what people are talking about today will be very different in 6 weeks' time. So the list MP, the MEP system does mean that a lot of the good cabinet ministers will stay on if they lose their seats. You know, you've got your list placings. Probably the ones that suffer most are the up-and-comers who haven't yet really, you know, their potential hasn't been realised. You can see that they're going to be good. And some of them go in and out. You know, don't forget a lot of these successful MPs on both sides. And I think, did you go in and out or did you just have the one crack?
I lost the first time.
Oh, right. You were never an MP?
Yeah, I was an MP, but I never lost.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. But I didn't lose.
But that's what would have been, you know, probably your potential, as you know, you spend 3 years really learning your stuff here. It's any job, you know, there's nothing worse than anyone listening now in a workplace. There's nothing worse than a young apprentice that comes in and knows everything and tell everyone everything. You sit down, you shut up, and as we used to say in the police, breathe through your ears for the first 3 years until you actually learn how things work.
I always found that slightly problematic advice, but it doesn't matter. Greg,
well, you never need to breathe through your ears, Michael.
Well, no, I always, you know, when your party's going in the opposite direction to where they promised to go, it's very difficult to go, I'll just sit here and let you do that. I mean, you know, you're either want to represent your constituents or you don't.
Come back to the river, mate. You know, I had a colleague, I used to say to her, she'd have fallout, say, mate, be a river, not a glacier. Don't try and push your way through that mountain. And to heck what gets in the way, just be the river, flow, and you'll actually might find that you'll get exactly where you wanted to be, but you might just get there another way.
Yeah, you and I might have different philosophies on that one, Greg. But nevertheless, All right.
Well, here we are, still alive, still on our feet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. We're both survivors. Mind you, we might have survived in a slightly different way if we'd made different choices. Listen,
well,
Greg.
True, but look at those left and right-hand turns in the road. You know, you think that you probably, if you're like me, there's a time you went one way, you could have gone another. I know I went as an undercover police officer many years ago, and I nearly didn't. I did it, and so much of what's happened in my life subsequently has happened as a result of going down that particular pathway. And you look back and say, I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't done that. That was probably one of those, and everyone listening today will all be thinking about that one time when they went left and could have gone right, not in a political sense, believe me, and where they would have ended up otherwise.
Yes, it's an interesting role, undercover detectives, when you would have been a detective. It's a hell of a job. Is it still a hell of a job in 2023?
Well, there's a bit more science, a bit clever about it now than they were in the old days. You know, the old days was pretty rough, and there was a lot of cops never came back, that just really got out there. There was no real science around it, no protection, and there were books written about it, and a lot of those guys are still... I buried a guy the other day, and one of my colleagues from that time, good old Poss, some of your listeners, as anyone who knows will know what I'm talking about, he'd been dead for 2 months before anyone found him. Yeah, he just came back, and he just never... was back in the police for about 2 or 3 years and left and sort of drifted for the rest of his life. And no one ever, probably PTSD, no one ever recognised it in those days, because everyone thought the danger was you'd get beaten up. That wasn't the danger. The danger was to the head. But I was very lucky. I went back to the family farm down the coast and went possuming and played rugby for the old Knockawa rugby team. And the Maoris got that great word, tūranga waiwai. And that means I went back to where my soul rested and healed my soul. It sounds a bit esoteric, but it's actually exactly what happened.
What is so
never got that opportunity, didn't get to do it.
What is so disturbing about being an undercover cop? Is it the betrayal of people that you are seeking to befriend? Is it taking the drugs? Is it potentially being in a violent situation? Is it all of those things?
Well, all those things, but one of the main things is that you're making friends with people and busting them, or more importantly, using them to bust the good people. You used to have to climb your way through. That was one of the things. The other thing was, understanding that, when you see life as a cop, you see it through one set of eyes. It's like doctors and every profession, you see things through the eyes. They always say doctors think the world's full of sick people. And all of a sudden, what really got is the people I met who were way brighter than me, who, but for the opportunities I'd had in life, would have been, could have been heads of, could have been running, so clever. When I was there, remember that in the pubs, the old video games first came in there. Well, these guys were smart. They could work their way, how to get round. They were always the top performers. They could go and strip a car down. And I thought if we could just harness that ability, but most of them they didn't know how they could ever exist in stream life. They always say, get back on the straight and narrow, but a lot of them didn't know what straight and narrow looked like. We all know people have gone off the rails, but when they've come back on the rails, they knew where the rails were. These people that I met, I thought, and this is how I end up in politics, really thought, I've been a cop for all this time, sort of locking them up. If this is my last opportunity to try and be part of something that gives them an opportunity to actually maybe learn what straight and narrow is. Because by heck, a lot of them, been at 10 schools, lived in 15 houses, have what I said before, no tūranga waiwai, nowhere they can call home. Parents, there's usually no father on the scene, and mum's, sort of probably with a third partner. These things, it's.
Just listening to you now, Greg, I can understand the motivation for you joining the Labour Party, because now I understand why you entered on that side of the house and that. But you must look at the last 6 years, my friend, and go, we're not making a hell of a lot of progress there, because law and order is problematic. And
we conveniently ignore was bloody COVID, mate. I mean, it's very fashionable now to just let's pretend COVID never existed. Well, all plans, like your own plans in life, were probably affected by COVID. Everybody's plans. And all of a sudden, Grant Robertson is a very conservative man. He's an Eden Protestant, financially. I remember he would be there, tell ministers, no spending, this is we're going to run, we're going to fiscally, we're going to be absolutely responsible. And then all of a sudden, and that still is the message, but all of a sudden he was faced with this pandemic where businesses were going to close. Look, you ask anyone listening here, I'll tell you, I ask, what would have happened to your business but for all that money that was borrowed, that was borrowed to enable your business to pay your staff, to business continuity, all those loans and things. That's where the money went. And all of a sudden, all the plans, all the opportunities to really get out there and make those things, they were put on hold like everyone else's life was. And now that's where we are at the moment. And it's so convenient to ignore it.
But you've got to remember, Greg, that the reason that you needed to borrow the money was because of the reactions and the reactive policy that we decided to employ. So, I mean, the one that kept the New Zealand death rate way lower. You go to an old people's home, mate. No. But you see, see how many percentage-wise, if we'd been in America, if we'd been in the UK, how many of them would be dead? Well, a heck of a lot. Yeah, but I could easily listen. You and I have a great argument on this one, but I would argue that if you'd got the vaccines in earlier and you'd inoculated and protected the elderly and the vulnerable, you wouldn't have needed to shut down New Zealand in the way that happened. And I would have pointed.
There was no vaccine for the first year.
No, but that's because we were late. Other countries had vaccinated their country. Look at Israel.
There wasn't. No, you're talking crap, mate.
No.
At the time when, remember, we were watching doctors, everyone dying in Italy. Remember, every night on our telly, we were seeing those massive death rates all around the world because they didn't have a vaccine, and that was what was coming here, and that's what never arrived here. So look, I know it's not trendy to argue this. I mean, on your platform, probably half of your switchboard's probably lit up now with people saying, it's all right. But actually, all I'd do is invite them to memory, go back to 2020. What was actually happening?
Oh, I'm not talking about 2020. Listen, I'm not talking about 2020, and you're not getting an argument from me on how we responded in March, April of 2020. I'm talking about.
Well, you are, because that's when we locked down.
Yeah,
that's
but no. We've locked down subsequent to that, Greg. We've locked down.
But we came into this conversation talking about the money that we needed to spend, and that was when it was all borrowed. When the vaccine arrived, well, heck, now we're being criticised for buying too much vaccine.
No, in actual fact,
come on.
No. In actual fact, we started this conversation on law and order, and if you remember rightly, what I said to you was, despite coming into the Labour Party with the intent of trying to change the policy to make sure you didn't get those damaged people that you talked about, that you were dealing with as a policeman, do you look at the last 6 years and go, we haven't made an awful lot of progress there? That's how we started this conversation. And then you said it was all to do with COVID.
Completely forgetting how many kids, one of the big things there was kids out of poverty. And by any measure, there's about 80,000 kids by the measures that I think pretty well everyone agrees are now out of poverty. That's where you started. Now, you might argue by the time you're 18, 20, it's too late. No, but starting and making sure that those are getting fed and getting housed. I mean, the housing has been a major issue. Built a heck of a lot. There's, I think, 1 in 7 of the social housing built in New Zealand has been built in this term. Conveniently overlooked. So, look, it's not enough. God, but it's a heck of a lot more than would have been done otherwise. So I look at, of course it could have been better. No one's going to say it's in paradise out there, but it could have been better, but it could have been a heck of a lot worse.
All right. Now, the other thing I'm interested in is this coming election, and from the perspective of somebody, I mean, I know what it's like being in a caucus in which you know that the tide's going out. I was a member of Parliament between 90 and 93. The National Party had come in, if you remember rightly, with a massive majority. And then it watched the tide go out really quickly within a term. Very similar to this in some ways. You come in with a huge majority, you think you're going to be there forever, and then suddenly, oops, things happen both internationally, nationally. Sometimes you hit the wrong policy and it just makes it worse, not better. and you watch your colleagues and you know that they're only here until the election. Are you having those sorts of feelings as well? Because I know what it was like being in the National Party between 90 and 93 in that caucus.
Do you know, interesting stuff, and I hear that, and you're looking at people who have traditionally seen Labor parties split and go into factions. I can give you an assurance that that's actually not happening. And a lot of old Labor people and people from political parties like yourself, old campaigners, are quite surprised at that. And you know that's the thing you look for. And I think probably you look at what often would lead to that. And if you look back in your time, probably when did you say you got sacked from the caucus?
No, I left. I left to go to New Zealand First in 95.
Oh, okay. But so did you leave, were there anyone, if you had left the party and there was a half of the people who thought you'd been hardly treated, that's where your seeds of dissent are sown. That hasn't happened. I can in here, and it's where you get unresolved issues or something happens. And I think I was never a member of the Labor Party until 2017. But from what I hear is that the real problem with factions. Factions kill anything, and that's we've certainly
and disunity. You're saying kills everything as well.
Factions that lead to disunity.
Yeah,
It's cause and effect, isn't it?
I understand what you're saying, and you're right. I mean, you would expect a whole series of Labor MPs to be cutting and running at the moment, but they're not. So, nevertheless, they're not going to have a job. Realistically.
The other thing to get through is the list process, because list is where people know where they are. Is that's the sort of political death list, isn't it? So, and again, once you get through that, and if anyone's going to sort of toss their toys out of the cot, that'll happen there. You've seen it with different parties. That hasn't happened either. So, again, these are the signs that the true political commentators, people with a bit of experience like you, will be looking for and looking at. There's little milestone things. Look, nobody's saying it's all great out there, and the political tides come in and out. But I'm not sure that this one's gone out yet.
All right, Greg,
neat tide, should say, Michael.
Well, listen, I'm going to have a chat with you, if you don't mind, prior to the election, just to see where you are in a month's time, if it's all right with you.
I'll know a lot more in a month than I do now. As it was a great day.
Good on you,
go
mate.
to bed knowing something you didn't know when you woke up.
Good on you.
Something you didn't know when you woke up.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you, Greg. All right, that is the Labor MP for Ohario, Greg O'Connor. Well, you'll make up your own assessments on what Greg said. Now I know. That'll be interesting. He didn't join the Labor Party until 2017. There you go, you see. There you go.